And so with that, I will pass it on to our brother Dan, who has entitled his exhortation this morning, Dissipation.
Good morning. I have to wonder how many of you who are not born in the U.S. know what this word means, dissipation. How many who are born in the U.S. know what dissipation means? Probably not a lot. A few, perhaps. Well, we'll see if we can't get a lesson out of this. First, I think I'm going to need a volunteer. I need someone to come up and help me with something. Any volunteers? I need just one volunteer to start. Not the little ones yet. Save them for a little bit later. I need a volunteer. Come on, we can't go forward without a volunteer. Michael's coming on up. Very good. Nope. So this is all about dissipation, right? So you got an idea here what's going on. So your job is to hold this.
You're not going to dump it on me, okay?
No. Hold it so they can see the water. Like hold it like back here. There you go. All right. So this is one drop you're going to see go in the water, and watch what happens. Red food coloring. See it kind of starting to dissolve, fuse, whatever. It's separating. Now I'll give it a little swish there. We'll watch it in just a moment. Sure, yeah, if you spill it, we got a different problem.
Yeah.
So gradually, you're going to see this whole clear water turn into just a slight red. Now, if this was like 100 gallons you were holding, I'm sure you could hold that, then you wouldn't see as much effect. Or if it's 1,000,000 gallons, you're probably not see any effect. You've heard it said about blood and sharks in the ocean. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's kind of the same principle. So you see what's happening. It's still actually, but the more you stir it, the more it's going to become a very light red. Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. All done?
Yes. And we didn't spill anything either, so that's a good start. Now, that might remind you of in Scripture where we read about the nations are as a drop in a bucket. That's in Isaiah 40. So that just gives you a little impression of that. All right, now I need 2 volunteers this time. Could be little ones. They might be good ones. I need 2 volunteers that like each other. That's something else. Oh. So, Joanna? Over there. With me? I gave Kaya something in her mouth. Now, this is about breathing. Now, you all know with COVID, breathing has, don't let her see, breathing has certain rules, you know, like we had the 6-foot rule. So if you're within 6 feet of somebody, there was a problem because someone determined that your breath could go 6 feet, whatever it really is. There's some distance where breath is. Okay, now stand back, Joanna. Go back about 10 feet. All right, now you blow at her. Now you blow at her. Can you tell what kind of smell she has? All right, come a little closer. Now blow again. Can you tell what smell she has? Oh, really? You better get closer. Come on closer. That's really close. Can you tell what smell that is? What smell is it? She said peppermint. Okay, you guys can split that. Go ahead. Thank you very much. So that just lets you know that when you breathe, your air goes out a certain distance and then it disperses, or you could say it dissipates. All right, that's, I guess if you sneeze, you know, you go to a certain more distance, but I started down this wild goose chase and I found out what % oxygen and nitrogen we breathe in and out. It's kind of interesting. But anyway, it's more interesting with COVID and how we've learned that breath is so important. All right, I need another volunteer. This is about sound. So sound also dissipates. So like if I'm talking here, you know, you can hear closer, but farther away, the sound waves go like this, and then you can't hear so much. So volunteer, Joni, you happen to be handy? don't have to do anything. So stand at the end of that, your ear. So if I'm talking to Joni real quietly like this, and you're my age, you might not hear it. If I do it like this, you hear pretty well because this takes out all the whatever stuff, the noise, and thank you. That was easy. And so you see how that's another thing that dissipates, which is sound, right? So we've had water, air, and sound. And actually, it's interesting in the Bible, you find they blew the trumpets often, and the trumpets got a really loud sound. So when they blew that trumpet, they heard it a long way. So whether it's Nehemiah building the walls and they were going to blow the trumpets, or whether it's in Joshua, they're blowing the trumpets, or it's in Exodus when Moses, and the sound of the trumpet comes from the mountain, it's a pretty big factor in the Bible. One more is light. So light is kind of interesting. So if I was to hold a flashlight out, and put it on something like, say here, you're going to see the light very close. And the more you go away, you don't see it, right? So if I hold it out there, that's a big distance. This is a small light. You're not going to see it because my assumption was, and I asked Sue not to jump on me too much because I know I'm probably going to screw up, but light dissipates because the farther you are away, the less you see of it. However, when I was researching it, the scientists say that in space or outer space, light does not dissipate. So light continues forever. Is that true, Sue? Yeah. Okay, so whenever there's noise or dust or whatever that blocks, say, the sun, then you could say it dissipates. But in a pure open space where there's nothing, they say light never ends. I thought that was quite a concept. What do you mean light never ends? That's what they say. So that kind of sent my mind wondering, like, wow, doesn't dissipate. That's one thing that doesn't dissipate. Everything seems to dissipate except for light. So it just made me think a little bit about how Jesus said that he's the light of the world. And that would make sense, that Jesus doesn't dissipate. He doesn't decline. He doesn't disperse. He doesn't scatter. So that's kind of just an interesting thought. All right, so let's just define dissipation a little bit. It means to disperse, diffuse, to weaken, dissolve, degrade, or decrease. And you kind of get the idea. You spread out more and more, it becomes less and less. All right, so that's kind of interesting. Well, what other things do you think, besides these four elements? We talked about water, breath, sound, and light. What else do you think dissipates? Just things you think about. Smell, that's a good one. So yeah. I forgot to do that. Did I forget to do that? Oh, I had another one too. I had an essential oil, but yes, so smell. What's another one? Memory. Oh, someone, our aged member. Yes, memory dissipates. What else? Taste, yes. Life, how does life dissipate? Good. Okay, I think that's definitely true. What else? What else? These things dissipate? For a lot of people, money disappears, right? Your time dissipates. It just evaporates, goes away. I'm guessing gravity. Art might be a stretch. I wouldn't know enough about that to know. Anything else come to mind? Emotional things, yes. Taste or feelings, same kind of thing. So for instance, if I hate somebody like really bad, over time that's going to dissipate. Like I'm going to forget. Like with Beth and I, use your example, if we have a fight, 2 days later I forgot the reason why totally. She'll remember every detail. Hers does not dissipate. Mine dissipates greatly. So I have no idea. Any other ones? Nature. Okay. So things degrade, or what is the law of thermodynamics? All things move towards disorder or dissipation, you could say. Your faith. Now that could be like light, and it could dissipate or it could strengthen. So that could go either way. It's true. I thought about waves or temperature. Those are a couple of other elements. Anything else? Love, like love and hate. Yes. All right, so good ones there. So now you're wondering, all right, dissipation, what does that have to do with my spirituality today? What does this have to do with being here at church? Well, that's the point here. Actually, you find dissipation in the Bible. Like, who would have thought that? But there it is. Be on your guard so that your hearts will not be weighed down with dissipation and drunkenness and the worries of life, and that this day will not come on you suddenly like a trap. So it looks like a negative sense here, doesn't it? Dissipation and drunkenness. Those are some bad things. It also means overburden, carousing, having parties, or feasting. Another verse says, do not get drunk with wine in which is dissipation, but be filled with the Spirit. Now I had to find these versions to find that word, because most versions don't have it, your versions like mine, but this one did. And that also means wickedness or excess or debauchery, wild living, recklessness. So it's spiritually, like someone said, that's negative, moving downward. Now, more verses. You didn't know there were so many verses in the Bible that said dissipation. It says in Peter, they are surprised that you no longer join them in the same excesses of dissipation, and so they blaspheme. That is wild living, unrestrained wickedness, riotness, reckless living. That's actually the definition of what that word is. Another one, suffering the penalty for doing wrong, they count it a pleasure to revel in the daytime. They are blots and blemishes, reveling in their dissipation while they feast with you. There's deceptions, deceiving, deceitful pleasures. Like, who would have thought dissipation's in the Bible? I would never have thought that. You got to look for things sometimes. Now here's one talking about the prodigal son. You know the story of prodigal son. Jesus tells him about how he goes away, he wastes his money. So it says here, the younger son said to his father, Father, give me the share of your estate that should come to me. So the father divided the property between them. After a few days, the younger son collected all his belongings and set off to a distant country, where he squandered his inheritance on a life of dissipation. That sounds bad, doesn't it? That is riotous, reckless, wasteful, foolish, wild living. When he had freely spent everything, a severe famine struck the country, and you know the rest. He eventually comes back to the father and confesses his sin in his state, and he finds forgiveness. So that's what spiritual dissipation is. That was 5 different passages with that word. There's a couple more depending on the version you find. So what I thought we'd do is look at an example of Peter and his spiritual dissipation and compare it to ourselves. Because I think, like all people in the Bible, even the greatest like Abraham, their faith levels and actions seem to waver. They can go up and down. So here we find this passage in Ephesians that says, remember that at that time you were separate from Christ. Separate, you're talking about distance. So you think about distance and dissipation. And the lesson you're going to get out of this is that the farther you are from Jesus, the worse you are off. Right? The closer you are to Jesus, the better you are off. But at that time you were separate from Christ, excluded from the citizenship in Israel, and foreigners to the covenants of the promise, without hope and without God in the world. But now in Christ Jesus, you who once were far away, have been brought near by the blood of Christ. So you see the distance in the words in this verse. So you have separation, exclusion, then you have far away and being brought near. There's a lot of distance just in this one verse. And you could say it has to do with dissipation. So of the example of Peter, he had a number of different examples where Peter kind of separated himself from Jesus in different ways. So when he was first called, you might remember, Jesus called him and Simon said, Master, we worked hard all night and haven't caught anything. Remember, Jesus told him to cast the net on the other side. But because you say so, I will let down the nets. When they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. So they signaled their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came and filled both boats so full that they began to sink. When Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and said, "Go away from me, Lord. I am a sinful man." So here he is physically close to him, perhaps like a picture like this, but spiritually, emotionally, he wanted to distance himself from Jesus because he felt distance from Jesus. He saw Jesus so high up here and he was so down here, and he just had this moment where he felt the guilt, and he felt the only way out was to send Jesus away. Well, that's not what we should do with our guilt, is it? Another passage of Peter was when he was walking on the water. And this one, I'll just read a part of this. If you want to look up Matthew 14. I'm sure you know this story. So Matthew 14, picking up in verse 22. So they're on the water. Immediately, he made the disciples get into the boat and go ahead of them. Verse 23, after he had sent the multitudes away, he himself went to the mountain to pray. And then it was evening, he was there alone. But the boat was already many stadia away from the land, battered by the waves. Again, you notice these distance things in all these verses. I didn't notice them so much. Jesus goes to pray, and he draws near to God. And then you have this distance on the water. Verse 25, in the fourth watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea. When the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were frightened, saying, "It's a ghost." But they cried out for fear. Immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take courage, it is I." So Peter boldly, remember in verse 28, he says, "Lord, if it's you, command me to come to you on the water." So that's a good thing, is to coming to Jesus, to following Jesus. So he's got the right intention here. But seeing the wind, he became afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, saying, "Lord, save me." And immediately Jesus stretched out his hand and took hold of him and said to him, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" So that's a good example of separation from Jesus. He's physically separate, he's trying to get near, but he's struggling with his own faith, because Jesus says, "O ye of little faith." But he is rescued, and he does reach Jesus. He does draw near to his master. A couple chapters later, Matthew 16, we find Jesus rebuking his disciple. This is just after Simon had this great confession a few verses earlier. Matthew 16:21, it says, "From that time Jesus Christ began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed and be raised up on the third day." But Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, "God forbid it, Lord, this shall never happen to you." Peter had the right intentions here. His spirit is right, but he is off base. Jesus turns and said to him, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me, for you are not setting your mind on God's interests, but on man's." So sometimes even our right thinking in trying to do what's right can still be wrong, as it was with Peter. So Peter has this dissipation in his thinking. Even though he was trying to think right, it still resulted in spiritual dissipation. In Matthew 26, a couple chapters later, after Jesus is arrested, verse 69, we know that Peter was sitting outside in the courtyard, and a certain servant girl came to him and said, "You too are with Jesus the Galilean." But he denied it before them all, saying, "I do not know what you're talking about." So he has his 3 denials here, and at the end the cock crows 3 times. So this fulfills what Jesus had prophesied and told him. And I think what we find here is he's in this case physically and spiritually separate from Christ. He can see Christ in the distance, but he's separate from fear. So his faith weakens and he denies his Lord. Now, fortunately, that's not how the story ends. So we look at John 21 with Peter, and he has another event with fish, another event with breaking bread, and another event with 3. So in John 21, verse 15, it says, "So when they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Peter, 'Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? He said to him, Yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And he said to him, Tend my lambs. He said to him again a second time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? He said to him, Yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said to him, Shepherd my sheep. He said to him the third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, Do you love me? And he said to him, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. Jesus said to him, Tend my sheep. So Peter starts out in this interaction physically and spiritually separated from Christ, but he's trying. Peter is trying as good as we could ever try, I think. And here Jesus draws him near. He brings him in and to his mindset, to this confession, to this great triple sin. He now has this great triple confession. He's brought back into the good graces of his master. So what do we learn about dissipation? I think I heard Nick say something in his prayer about the God who was and is to come. In one sense, that's true. In another sense, God does not change at all. I think we recognize that. God is so much bigger than our minds can comprehend or fathom, but we know that God doesn't change. He says that. A passage in Psalm, the psalmist looks up to the heavens and he says this, he says, When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars, which you have set in place, what is mankind that you are mindful of them, human beings that you care for them? So one of the lessons is that God does not dissipate. God doesn't change. It's not like the God over there is stronger than God over here. So for us to try to think about God being omnipresent is like, our minds can't capture that. Like how do you dial into everyone at the same time, everywhere? Who knows how many worlds? This is our world. We know this little speck on our world, but to imagine how God is omnipresent, that is really beyond our comprehension. Here's a passage that I really like. So it's in Jeremiah, it's in more of a modern version, but it says, I am a God who is everywhere and not in one place only. No one can hide where I cannot see them. Do you not know that I am everywhere in heaven and on earth? Isn't that an awesome passage? I am a God who is everywhere and not in one place only. No one can hide where I cannot see them. Who would know that Jeremiah had a passage like that? Another psalm says this. It says, from heaven the Lord looks down and sees all mankind. From his dwelling place he watches all who live on earth. God doesn't dissipate. God does not decline. There's no anything like that with God at all. For this is what the high and exalted one says, Isaiah, He who lives forever, whose name is holy. I live in a high and holy place, but also with the one who is contrite and lowly in spirit. So, passage is saying that God is everywhere. Somehow God is in the heavens, God is among us as well. Our God is active with his creation. Yes, he created it long ago, but he's active and working with our creation today. So with Jesus and our relationship with him, again, the whole lesson is to draw near. The farther away we are physically, whether I'm holding a Bible now or haven't touched it in a year, or whether I am actively spiritually close to him in prayer, or distance because, like Peter, go away from me. I just can't deal with this now. I'm too messed up. These are all passages where Jesus came and told someone, follow me. Maybe it was Matthew the tax collector. Maybe it was someone he healed. Each of these people, Jesus basically said, follow me. It's not a hard command. That's something for us to listen, to take in, and to meditate on. How can I better follow Jesus? So, to avoid spiritual dissipation, I'm sure you've all, or most of you know the story about footprints in the sand. So the story, in case you don't know, is that there was two sets of footprints walking, and one person was struggling, and eventually there was one set of footprints, and the person says to Jesus, they said, you know, I had all these struggles, all these waves in life, all these challenges, and my footsteps disappeared. Why did you abandon me? And it's at that time that Jesus says to him, that is the time that I carried you. I didn't abandon you.
So here's the point of the message. To avoid spiritual dissipation, A, stay close to Jesus, follow in his steps closely, do what he said. Sometimes that's simpler than, or not as simple as we think it is. And here's 2 verses from Hebrews that really gives us, I think, the entire message put together. So Hebrews 10, verse 21 says, since we have a great priest over the house of God, let us draw near to God with a sincere heart and with the full assurance that faith brings, having our hearts sprinkled to cleanse us from a guilty conscience and having our bodies washed with pure water. Let us hold unswervingly to the hope we profess, for he who promised is faithful. And let us consider how we may stir up one another towards love and good works, not giving up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, and all the more. And then last passage from Hebrews 12, verse 1. When you think of dissipation, think of this. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders us, and the sin that so easily entangles. And let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith, who for the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Don't let your faith dissipate, but strengthen in faith.